Welcome back in Houdini. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain, and in this lesson we now want to start to texture our toothbrush scene with the textures we generated in Substance Painter, and we also want to build some shaders here from scratch. If you followed along, you have the same file here, so you have the glass, you have the toothbrush here, and you have your bristles. If you haven't followed along and you want to now dive into this project or you need help, you can download these files from Gumroad. There I have an account, and for a small fee as a thank you, you can have all these files ready to start with. But it's better for you if you want to practice to follow along. So let's start now here in this scene. I don't want to see the bristles, so I've deactivated all the visibilities here. Also, we don't need the brush for a moment, so deactivate here the visibility of the brush. We don't want to see the reference planes here. And we have now a scene in which we have placed an environment light. In one of the earlier lessons, you see that I have linked here the bridge HDR. Then we have a camera here, which we want now to reposition. And we have our glass. So let's first select our camera here, switch to it. And you can now activate here the handle tool to use these handles, or you can lock yourself into the camera, and I place myself here in a nice angle for this glass here. Okay, don't forget to deactivate here the lock, otherwise you move your camera while you are working. And in the next step now we need a floor here. So let's add here on the scene level a grid and name it floor. And I think I would like to have it bigger, and I dive for this into the floor, into the grid, and here on the size, let's make it 30 meters. Okay, so it's enough, and later we can rotate it if we need to. So let's jump out of that. And now we want to start to add our materials. And one question which I always have in training is where to place it. Many people tend to work here in the /matte context, and you also see that here in the /matte context we have our hair shader, because Houdini has added the hair shader here for our bristles by himself. But you have to understand that this /matte context is for the whole scene, and we have built our own objects, and maybe you want later to use these objects as HDAs, you want to export them separately, or you want to make copies of them and so on. And so I like the idea of encapsulating everything in one package which belongs together. So if I have here the floor, for example, I want that all the materials which are added to the floor are part of this container here. And for this I dive into the floor container. Now I'm in sublevel, and in this sublevel you can add other network types. So let's use the tab key and write the word material, and you see here that we have a material network here which we can place and rename it. So for example, floor material. Okay, and then we can dive into this floor material. You see in the moment we are still in geometry, but if you dive here, you are in a Vex builder, so you are now in a material network, which is part now of this container here, and everything is now encapsulated. I really used to work with this material palette here, and I like the material palette a lot because we have presets and so on. So how can I use this now? So let's take a look into the material palette and try to understand what you find here. On the left we have these lists here with the so-named galleries, so for different render engines and uses. So these are my presets. And on the right side you normally have this /matte context open. But if you click here, you see that we have a whole bunch of different material contexts in our scene. If you take a closer look, we have the old /shop context here with no children, so it's empty at the moment. Then we have our two reference planes which encapsulated their own networks here. Then we have the brush here with the quick material and so on. So we have added our own network here, and you see here under object floor material we have our own network, and you can open it here, and now you can drag and drop into this network like before. So it's a really fast way to find the right network and to use the presets if you want to use them. Let's talk really briefly about these presets. The principled shader, which I use in 99%, is here, principled shader. Then we have some presets here for different kind of materials, so for metallic or liquids or industrials. And then we have, and these are the shaders which I use from here, volume shaders. So if you don't want to build them by yourself, you can start with a preset like the billowy smoke or the flames and so on. So these are shaders for volumes. Let's take a closer look here. I take a principled shader here and I drag it over into my context. And then I take, for example, a concrete, drag it over. And then we want to have, for example, here something from the volume world. Let's take a flame here. And then I also want to have something, let's take a look here. Here, a basic diffuse. You see that we have different icons here. And these icons give you a hint what kind of material is behind that. You see that the principled shader here and the concrete have the same castle. And this castle here is the Disney castle because this is a principled shader. So you see in the icon that these are the principled shaders which rely on the Disney idea of PBR. Then we have here something which is for volumes. You see it here with this flame. And we have this funny cube here with these stripes. And these are mantra shaders. And we still can use the classic mantra shader. So I will use it in a moment to show you. But in most cases, if I build surfaces, I work with a principled shader. So I select now these here and I get rid of them. Goodbye. Another little tip which I can give you here in this context is that you can jump to the right network here from the material palette by double-clicking onto the shader. So if I make now a double-click here on the principled shader, you see that Houdini jumps now directly into my container into the right network. So a really fast way of navigating. So the material palette is really useful for some cases. Let's name now this shader floor. And then we have to assign it. And to assign it, we have different ways. One way would be take it and drop it. But be aware, and you see it here at my mouse cursor, you get an absolute path to this floor, which is not what I want. But for the moment, I will do it, and then I will change it in a moment. So I do that. Now the shader is on my floor, and then we can switch here to the render view. We used that before. And I click here render to make an IPR rendering. The mantra IPR is still in my scene. If you don't have one, no problem. Houdini will generate a mantra IPR for you. It takes a while, it generates the scene, and then it renders through the active ROP camera. And we have one camera with the original name cam1 in the scene, so you will get an image like this here. If you don't see now your glass or something goes wrong here, a little tip from my side. Here you can switch directly into a floating dialog of this node. So if you want to change the camera, for example, because you have the feeling that it doesn't use the right camera, you don't need to go here to the render nodes and so on. You can click here beside of this mantra node here on this white icon, and you see you have now a floating window of the options of this mantra node. And here is the camera. And if you have renamed the camera and mantra haven't found it, you can click here and show mantra the right camera which you want to use. And after you have done this, you can close the whole thing, and yeah, then you can render again, and then you have this image here. Another little tip, this IPR renderer here, and if you render with mantra, has a nice feature that you also can take a shader for debugging purposes, but it works also for the final assignment, and you can drag it here onto the floor, for example. And it also works. So let's render this. We also select here the floor, and then we can take a look into the options of this node. It takes a while to generate the scene, but if the scene is generated, you can change parameters while the renderer is working, and this is then really fast. So it starts rendering. You see here the process, and now we can say, okay, I want to have a floor which is a little bit darker. So I go into the base color here. And what I want to do is I bring the value down, but I want to have it a little bit more bluish. So I go here into the blue cold and bring the saturation a tick upwards, and then I wait here. And what you see is that Mantra now always renders the whole scene here. And if you later have, for example, here glass and so on, it will take a while. So what you can do inside of this window here is you can hold down the Shift key and drag a region here, which you want to use. And then if you have to restart, or if it's still rendering, then it will start by himself. It only renders now this area here. If you want to get rid or change this area, you can Shift drag again to, for example, say I only want to see this area here. And if you want to get rid, hold down the Shift key and click outside of this render area, and then this here is gone. So let's open this area here to have it faster. And then I take a look. I want to have it darker, so I go here to intensity and make it darker. Yeah, maybe something like that here. Then we go through the options. We have here the IOR, the index of refraction, which helps for the reflection here. I think it's good like it is, but I think, yeah, maybe it's too rough. I want to see a little bit more reflection here on the floor, so we can bring the roughness to 0, so we have a perfect reflection. Let's take a look how this looks. Okay. And then we bring it up a little bit, let's say 0.02 maybe. I think a little bit more. Yeah, something like that here looks good for me. I click outside with Shift so that I see the whole thing. And if you now see the whole thing, you see, okay, I think the reflection is too strong. And we go back here to a value of 0.15. Yeah, that it doesn't distract too much. So now I told you that I don't like absolute paths to materials. Let's fix that. We go now to the container. So go back here into the scene level. And if you now select your floor container, you will see that the tab render here is now written in bold letters, which means that there is a change, and we can go into that, and here we see this is the path to the material, and you see it starts with object, so it starts at the topmost level here. You also can use here in the network view Shift W to see here the whole hierarchy, and you see it starts here with object, and then it goes here to floor, here it is, and then it goes down into this network, and there is the shader. What I want to do, Shift W again to get rid of that, is I want to have a relative path. And here's a really nice feature. If you now go here to the white arrow, you see that the operator chooser stands on the correct material. So you don't have to search for it. But what I do now is I tick here export relative path. And the moment you accept now, you see the path here changes, and now it's a relative path. That means it starts in the container itself, because we are on the container, and it only goes one step upwards to the floor material network and then connects to the floor. Now it's relative, and now this here is really encapsulating everything. Nice. Let's press save and do the glass. So let's search for the glass. Here it is. Nice. And one thing we have to make sure, if you ever work with transparent objects, and this is something I see all the time, you have to get rid of intersections with floors. It will make dark shadows in the bottom of your glass and makes problems. We can test this in a moment, but I first want to show you how to get rid of that. So you go into the glass, and if I now see the glass here, for example, from the side view, you will see that you maybe have here a little intersection into the floor, but you don't see it really here, and that's the reason why we really often have problems. We can check this on a different way. We can go out here to the scene, and now we look here. Let's go out of this container. Under the floor, and now you see that some polygons are under the floor, and this will be a problem later. So how to get rid of that? You have to set the axis for your glass perfectly that we have a little bit of air between the glass and the floor, like reality. Yeah, so the glass is on the table, but we have a little gap, and this is exactly what you need. To do that, we can use a helper. I go into my glass. I go here into the side view again. You saw this here was not visible for us. And what you can use now is you can use a transform node and try it for yourself to move the mesh upwards so that you don't penetrate. Or you can use our friends, the sideFX labs tools. So if you go here into the shelf, there is a tool for that. I think here it is, axis alignment. Or you can use directly here the node in the sub context, so tab key, and the tool is named labs axis align. And I add this node here and I bring it here to the tree. And if you now select this, you see that you can now align the axis in 3 different directions. We are only thinking about the y-axis, and now I change this so that you see what's happening. So if I go here to center, you now see that the axis of this geometry sits exactly in the center, so we are now half on the floor. Then you can go to max, which uses the max of our bounding box around the glass, so this is the top of the glass. Or you can go here and say the min, and now we have exactly the bounding box here sitting on the floor. If you now want to have a little bit more space, you can add a transform at the end and move it a tiny little bit upwards. But yeah, this is an extremely fast way thanks to the guys from sideFX to adding these labs tools. If you don't have them, search for the shelf sideFX labs here under the plus sign. Here it is. And then the first time you click here, update toolset, and then you get the tools after restart, and then you can use them. Okay, now the glass is on the floor. Great. Let's go back to the camera. Here we are. And now we can do the same thing. We dive into the glass, make a material network here. I name it glass material. Dive into that. And this time I know that I want to use, for example, a principal shader. So I type here prin, and you see here 2 principal shaders. We need this principal shader, not the core version, because the core version is only a part of it for adding your own nodes around that to build your own shader. The principal shader is a complete shader, so use that here. Okay. We can name this. This is glass. And like before, we can test this. This time I render here, shift drag to have here the area which we are interested in, press the render button. And then we can drag here the shader onto the glass, and you will see it restarts, and now we have this principal shader on the glass. How do we do glass in a principal shader? It's really easy. The only thing you have to change is the transparency. So you go here to transparency, and here's the transparency amount. You bring it up to 1, because glass is 100% transparent in our case. Takes a while. And here's now our glass. It looks strange because the roughness here is really high, and this roughness is not only the reflection, it's also the refraction, and this takes a long time. So first, make it 0 to see perfect glass. Okay. And then the next step is the IOR, so the index of refraction. 1.5 is a good glass. Glass varies between 1.4 to 1.8 or 8.5. It depends. So yeah, it's a little bit of a look development you do. And I liked in the original glass this really strong refraction. So let's bring it up to something really strong. Yeah, maybe something like that here. So really nice refraction. Then I want to tint the glass. It was a little bit greenish. So this is the transmission color. So I search here for green, and I add green here totally to see what happens. And you will see that our glass is now a little bit too green. Okay. And the question normally is, do I now change here the color or the add distance? What I normally do is I like to work with the color here first, and then I go to the add distance. This add distance means how far has a ray to go through this medium until it reaches this color. And these are only 10 centimeters. And yeah, so that's the reason why this here is really fast, totally green. So you have to increase the distance here. Let's say 10 meters, for example. And now you see in these areas where the glass is really thin, the ray doesn't go too far through the medium. It's not tinted or really low tinted, but here in the bottom you see exactly what you want to see. And I like the look here, but it's a little bit too harsh for my taste, this green. So I go a little bit more in this bluish direction. That was a little bit too far. Yeah, maybe something like that. And then you can desaturate if you like also this color. So it's a play between add distance, saturation, and the color itself. I normally don't darken the color here because this makes later problems in rendering. And so I really take the color and then work with the add distance. Yeah. Now I'm happy with that. So the final touch will be a little bit of roughness, a really tiny bit. So let's do that because this glass is not perfect. And yeah, then I think this scene is done. I shift click out here to see the whole rendering. And I've told you I show you the problem which you have if you intersect with the floor. So if I now render this, you see there are no black areas here in the glass. But if you now go here to the objects, into the glass, and I go here to the axial alignment and bypass it, and then we render again, you now see that we have here a little black area which is inside the glass, and this is the thing I don't want to see. So really often this is due to the fact that the alignment is not correct. A last thing for correcting dark areas inside of a glass or a scene with glass, you have to count how deep a ray has to travel if you have refractions. If you have a glass like this, you have to shoot your ray on the surface of the glass, then you go through the glass, so you come out inside of the glass, then you hit the backside wall of the inside, and then again the outside. So you have 4 hits to go through this glass. If you now have a scene where you have a liquid inside of the glass which has a front and a back, you have 2 another hits which you have to render. Or you have a camera position where you look through 2 or 3 glasses at the same time for some areas. You always have to count. And Mantra, as a renderer, as a ray tracer, has a limit. And if you select your Mantra node here, go to rendering, and you go here then to limits, you see under refract limit that you only calculate 10 hits. So in our case, front, back, back, front, you have 4 hits, everything is fine. Maybe you have a ray which refracts here a little bit more in these areas, but 10 is okay. If you have a more complex scene, you have to increase that. So that's it for the glass and the floor. And in the next lesson, we want to texture the brush. See you.